First, let's delve into various juniper species utilized for bonsai. In bonsai culture, junipers are ubiquitous and highly sought after, particularly yamadori or collected examples. In Japan, the most popular juniper species used for bonsai is Juniperus chinensis, often referred to as Shimpaku in Japanese, which is naturally occurring in various forms throughout the high mountainous regions of the country. Included here are varieties such as Itoigawa, found in the Niigata prefecture, Kishu, which is slightly more coarse and slow-growing, Tohoku, which grows in the northeastern region of Japan, and many others. Other popular juniper species found in Japan include Juniperus procumbens, referred to as Sonare in Japanese, and Juniperus rigida, or needle juniper. In other regions of the world, one can easily find an even wider array of juniperous species that can be utilized for bonsai. For example, Sabina junipers in Europe, as well as Rocky Mountain junipers, California junipers, and Sierra junipers in the United States, all lend themselves well to bonsai culture. Each of these species possesses unique foliar, growth, and deadwood characteristics, all of which are a result of the processes of evolution by natural selection over millennia. What's more, within a given species, there often exists a spectrum of foliar coarseness. Juniper varieties can all be classified as alternating leaf pattern species, as the location of latent buds alternates down the length of each shoot. This has wider implications for care and maintenance, which will be discussed later in this tutorial. As temperatures begin to heat up in spring, the winter color of juniperous species will fade and the normal greenish hue will return. It is at this time that most juniper species are best repotted. In the northern hemisphere, this means any time in March or early April for most climatic regions. It should be noted here that Juniperus rigida, which is a relatively fickle species, is best repotted as the new buds fully swell and pop, perhaps slightly later in March to mid-April. This species can also be repotted in early June, just after the second flush of growth begins to appear following pruning. Juniperus rigida pruning will be discussed in detail later in this tutorial. When repotting junipers, use a very coarse and porous mix. We recommend a mix of Akadama, lava rock, and pumice in a 1:1:1 ratio. A drainage layer of coarse soil should be placed in the bottom of the container, followed by a smaller grain, approximately 1/8 inch particle size, of the same mix. When trimming the roots of a juniper, first remove a majority of the old soil using a root rake and a chopstick, taking care not to damage the roots too much. Start with the underside of the root ball, then work around the periphery. For most juniper species, it is okay to remove up to approximately 50% of the root mass at once using sharp scissors. However, in such cases, one will also need to thin the foliage by 20 to 30%. In most instances, our recommendation is to remove as much of the old soil as possible with a root rake and chopstick and trim only 20 to 40% of the total root mass each repotting session. Again, the exception to this rule is the needle juniper, which reacts poorly to over-vigorous root work during repotting. Our recommendation for Juniperus rigida is to wait until the new buds begin to open and elongate in late March or early April before repotting, and avoid cutting more than about 20% of the root mass in one session, using a leather punch to aerate the solid soil mass directly under the trunk for oxygen and water penetration. Repotting frequency will be dependent on several factors: age, root growth speed, and soil breakdown speed. However, most juniper bonsai are repotted every 3 to 6 years. For further details on the repotting process, please review our online beginner's bonsai course. Following typical repotting sessions, most junipers can be placed directly out in the sun. However, if the root system is worked vigorously and more than 40% of the root mass is removed, be sure to protect the tree with partial shade from the hot afternoon sun for at least 2 weeks. In all cases, protect freshly repotted junipers from unexpected harsh frosts. When discussing fertilization, we must first determine the purpose or purposes for which we are fertilizing. There are 3 basic stages of development in bonsai: health, development, refinement. The first of these stages, health, refers to the initial necessity of improving the health of a given tree to be used in bonsai culture. Failure to establish health in a tree will invariably lead to developmental issues in the future, and could potentially cause the tree's demise. Foliar health is a reflection of root health and vice versa, so a dualistic approach to fertilization must be taken to produce positive results. Found throughout each and every plant is a naturally occurring hormone called auxin, derived from the Greek word auxion, which means to grow or increase. The function of auxin is to guide the growth of plant organs, from shoots to roots. Auxin concentration will indicate, for example, to each growth tip that it should seek to grow upwards towards the sun, a process known as phototropism. And perhaps more importantly, auxin will indicate to each growth tip that it should try to become the dominant apex of the tree by diffusing back downward to inhibit the production of ulterior lateral bud growth. Because auxins are not found in every cell, they must be translocated to areas of need, primarily moving from the tips of shoots down to the roots. Perhaps counterintuitively, removing shoot tips removes the native auxin in those areas, which subsequently limits the translocation of that auxin to the root structure, a process known as polar auxin transport, thus inhibiting root growth. Auxin translocation from shoots to roots can be promoted by first leaving shoots on unhealthy trees untouched, and second by foliar feeding. To promote PAT and the resulting root growth, utilize a foliar feeding regimen when developing the health of juniper species. Organic feeding using widely available products such as fish emulsion is recommended, so as to avoid foliar burn. In early spring, begin a bi-monthly foliar feeding regimen, applying the proper mixed ratio as indicated on the product label. Continue foliar feeding as needed through the entire growing season. Assuming that your bonsai is already planted in the proper medium, i.e. 1 part Akadama, 1 part lava rock, and 1 part pumice, let's focus on producing a healthy, fibrous root system through fertilization. Because bonsai are grown in small containers, the normal soil volume is exponentially decreased, thus creating an environment in which trees are likely to weaken and struggle to survive if not properly cared for. One way in which this effect can be offset is by utilizing organic fertilizer cakes or pellets. Why organic? Organic fertilizers allow naturally occurring beneficial bacteria to better thrive in the soil. Bacteria that would likely not survive if harsher chemical fertilizers were used. Perhaps the most important of these bacteria is mycorrhiza, the function of which is to increase the surface volume of a root system, thus allowing a larger volume of nutritional intake by the plant. There are many great brands of pre-made organic fertilizer cakes or pellets, which can be ordered online through various outlets. For purposes of health development, search for cakes with a higher nitrogen content, a chemical that will aid in increasing auxin production and subsequently stronger, faster growth. If pre-made cakes are unavailable in your area, consider purchasing empty tea bags and filling them with cottonseed meal in powder form. Cottonseed meal provides a well-balanced NPK content. Powdered kelp can also be added to provide additional trace elements for bacterial and growth enhancement. Mix cottonseed meal at a 9:1 ratio to kelp. Junipers can be fertilized year-round as they will actively photosynthesize even during the colder winter months. However, this approach is only necessary if trees are in a weakened state. Apply approximately 1 cake or 1 tea bag per every 2 square inch space of soil surface. Replace them every 4 to 5 weeks during the growing season, and every 8 to 9 weeks in the colder seasons, making sure to place new cakes or tea bags in different areas than those previously applied. This will ensure that all areas of the root system receive fertilization throughout the year. The second stage in bonsai creation is the developmental stage, and fertilization must be adjusted accordingly to reach desired outcomes. Assuming that your tree has been properly brought into a healthful state through the approach described previously, foliar fertilization can be reduced in frequency to avoid promoting overly vigorous growth. Again, using an organic fertilizer such as fish emulsion, foliar feed from early spring through the growing season on a once-per-month schedule. Application of organic cake or tea bag fertilizer will only be necessary during the growing season at this stage, replacing them on a 4 to 5 week cycle. For better results, stagger this application with that of the foliar feed. For example, apply new cakes at the beginning of each month and apply a foliar feed in the middle of each month during the growing season. This approach to fertilization will provide a steady flow of nutrients to the tree, promoting back budding, foliar density, shoot growth, and root production. Once a juniper has gone through the first two stages, its health having been restored and its root mass and foliar density increased, we can then move into the third stage of refinement. It may take several years to reach this stage, and it is at this point that foliar feeding becomes much less important, as the root to foliage density ratio should be stabilized by this point in a tree's development. Foliar feeding can thus be reduced to once or twice per growing season, if at all. Cake or tea bag application should remain the same. Juniper species are somewhat drought tolerant, but avoid allowing the soil to become completely bone dry. In the spring, all healthy plants will increase water intake, so care must be taken to water them accordingly. As temperatures begin to increase, check juniper bonsai twice per day, watering only as the soil dries out. In the heat of the summer, we recommend